The space station called Harmony 7 floated in the darkness between stars. Inside its massive central chamber, representatives from across the galaxy gathered for what everyone hoped would be a historic moment. Two civilizations that had been enemies for 300 years were finally ready to make peace. Captain stood near the back of the observation deck and watched the crowd below. He wore the dark blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, still crisp and new. Humans had only joined the galactic community 15 years ago and still felt like a student among teachers. Around him, aliens of every imaginable shape whispered and clicked and hummed to each other in languages his translator could barely keep up with. The delegation entered from the east door. They looked like living sculptures made of crystal, each one catching the light and throwing rainbow patterns across the walls. Their bodies rang like bells when they moved, creating an eerie music. They had been fighting for longer than humans had been exploring space. They came from the west. They were harder to see, their bodies seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it. They appeared as dark shapes with too many angles, beings adapted to live in the empty spaces between stars. When they moved, reality seemed to blur around them slightly. The temperature dropped as they entered. Both groups refused to look at each other. 3 centuries of war had killed billions on both sides. The dispute had started over mining rights in a nebula, but it had grown into something much worse. Pride, revenge, and ancient grudges had turned a simple argument into endless violence. Felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Park, his colleague from the Cultural Liaison Office. She was shorter than him, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. They had worked together for 2 years, and she had taught him more about alien customs than all his training combined. "Do you think they'll actually sign it?" she asked quietly. Shrugged. "They're here, that's something." "They're here because they're both exhausted," said. "Neither side can afford to keep fighting, but neither wants to be the first to surrender. That's where we come in." Ambassador Wu stepped up to the central podium. He was an older man with gray hair and the patient expression of someone who had spent decades convincing people to be reasonable. He raised his hands, and the crowd slowly quieted. "Honored delegates," he began, his words translated instantly into 40 languages. "Today marks a turning point. The treaty you see before you represents 3 years of negotiation and compromise. It was created by the finest legal minds in the galaxy, written on material that transcends language and perception itself." The treaty sat on a raised platform in the center of the room, inside a shimmering stasis field. Even from where stood, he could see it was beautiful. It looked like a large sheet of golden-brown parchment, but it seemed to shift slightly as he looked at it. The edges caught the light like honey. "This document," Ambassador Wu continued, "will be displayed here for 3 days, as per galactic tradition. Representatives from both sides will have the opportunity to study it, to understand every detail. Then, on the 4th day, we will gather for the signing ceremony on Earth itself." A murmur ran through the crowd. Earth was neutral ground, a young world with no connection to the ancient conflicts that plagued the galaxy. That was why the humans had been chosen to host this peace. They had no history to overcome, no old hatreds to forget. Felt a mix of pride and terror. This was humanity's first major role in galactic politics, and the pressure was enormous. If this succeeded, Earth would be seen as a place of wisdom and neutrality. If it failed, humans would be remembered as the species that couldn't even host a simple ceremony. The stasis field deactivated with a soft hum. The treaty settled onto its pedestal, fully visible now. To human eyes, it looked almost edible. The golden-brown surface reminded him of fresh-baked cookies, and there was a smell in the air like honey and warm grain. He shook his head. It was just a document. His mind was playing tricks on him. A scribe approached the treaty with reverent steps. The creature was responsible for creating the treaty material, a process that had taken 3 full years. Its multiple eyes gleamed as it gestured at the document with delicate limbs. This biosynthetic material, the explained in its clicking voice, can be perceived by any species regardless of their sensory organs. They will read it through crystalline resonance. They will sense it through gravitational distortion. Each species sees the same words, the same promises, in the way that makes sense to them. The crowd pressed forward to look. Even the delegations moved closer, though they kept to opposite sides of the room. For a moment, there was silence as everyone absorbed the importance of what lay before them. His communication device buzzed. He looked down and saw a message from his wife, Sora. She was off-world on a research station studying alien plant biology. The message was simple. Good luck today. I'm proud of you. House felt a spike of guilt. Was his 5-year-old daughter, and she was currently in the observation room down the hall. His arrangements had fallen through at the last minute, and Sora was too far away to help. He had no choice but to bring to work something Ambassador Wu had reluctantly approved. "She's fine," he typed back. "Watching educational videos. I'll check on her in an hour." He pocketed his device and tried to focus on the ceremony, but his mind kept drifting to his daughter. Was a good kid, curious and smart, but she was still 5 years old. 5-year-olds got bored. They wandered. They touched things they shouldn't touch. He shook off the worry. The observation room was secure, and he had asked Jinnah Lee, a young intern, to keep an eye on her. Jinnah was enthusiastic and reliable. Everything would be fine. Down in the central chamber, the delegates began to file past the treaty, each group taking their turn to observe it from a respectful distance. They hummed in crystalline harmonies. They were silent and still. Dozens of other species watched with hope. Maybe, just maybe, this ancient war was finally ending. Touched's arm again. "The transport to Earth is scheduled for 3 days from now. We need to start preparing the ceremony hall in Seoul. Are you coming to the planning meeting?" Nodded. "Let me just check on first. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes. As he walked toward the observation room, allowed himself a moment of optimism. Humanity was helping to end a war. They were proving that sometimes fresh eyes and neutral ground were exactly what old problems needed. In 3 days, the galaxy would gather on Earth to witness history. He had no idea that history was about to be made much sooner than planned, and in a way that no one could possibly predict. In the ceremony hall behind him, the treaty sat on its pedestal, golden and gleaming and smelling faintly of honey. It would remain there, unguarded and accessible for the next 72 hours. Everyone assumed it was safe. After all, it was just a document. What could possibly go wrong? The second day of the treaty viewing passed more smoothly than anyone expected. Delegates from 40 different species came to observe the document, and while the ends still refused to speak to each other, at least they hadn't started fighting. Ambassador Wu considered this a victory. Stood in the ceremony hall going over security protocols with Bo, the head of station security. Bo was a former military officer who took his job very seriously. He had positioned guards at every entrance and installed sensors that could detect weapons from 20 different species. "What about the treaty itself?" asked, looking at the document on its pedestal. "Should we put it back in the stasis field when the hall closes at night?" Bo shook his head. "Galactic tradition says it must remain accessible during the viewing period. Besides, who would try to steal it? Every government in the galaxy knows what it looks like. There's nowhere to hide it." Suppose that made sense. Still, something made him uncomfortable. The treaty just sat there, unprotected, smelling like fresh pastries. He had noticed several other humans stopping to sniff the air when they walked past it. They had assured them the smell was normal, just a byproduct of how the material processed ambient energy. His communication device buzzed. It was a message from the delegation. They wanted to adjust the lighting in the ceremony hall. The current setup was too bright for their void-adapted eyes. It was causing them pain. "I need to handle this," told Bo. "Can you keep watching things here?" Bo nodded. already scanning his security displays. Hurried off to deal with the lighting dispute, which took longer than expected. The wanted near total darkness, which would make it impossible for most other species to see anything. Eventually, they compromised on a system of rotating light levels, with dimmer periods specifically for void-adapted species to view the treaty. By the time returned to the ceremony hall, 2 hours had passed. He found Bo coordinating with the new lighting technicians and remembered with a jolt that he needed to check on. He had left her with Jinnah Lee in the observation room, and he hadn't heard from either of them. He made his way through the station corridors, nodding to various delegates. The observation room was a small space with comfortable chairs and large windows overlooking the ceremony hall below. It was meant for VIPs and staff who wanted to watch events without being in the crowd. When opened the door, he found Jinnah standing by the window, talking rapidly into her communication device. She looked stressed, her face pale and worried. The room was empty otherwise. Where's asked, his voice sharp with sudden fear. Jinnah spun around, her eyes going wide. Sir, I'm sorry, I just got a call from Ambassador Wu's office, and I thought she was right here watching her videos, but when I turned around. Didn't wait for her to finish. He ran from the room, his heart pounding. The station was huge, with hundreds of corridors and rooms, could be anywhere. She was a curious child who loved exploring. He had told her 1,000 times not to wander off, but she was 5 years old. 5-year-olds forgot instructions the moment something interesting caught their attention. He activated his communication device, calling for station-wide assistance. This is Captain. I need help locating a human child, female, 5 years old, black hair, wearing a blue dress. Last seen in observation room 7. Bo's voice came back immediately. On it, activating internal sensors. Ran through the corridors, checking every door, every corner. His mind raced with worst-case scenarios. What if she had gotten into a restricted area? What if she had encountered one of the more dangerous species? What if she was hurt? He passed several aliens who looked at him with concern. A delegate chimed a question, but couldn't stop to explain. He reached the ceremony hall and burst through the doors. The hall was quiet. A few delegates wandered around the edges, studying informational displays about the peace process. The treaty sat on its pedestal in the center, looking just as it had before. Except something was wrong. Moved closer, his footsteps echoing in the large space. The treaty looked smaller than he remembered. No, not smaller, incomplete. A large section of it was simply gone and the edges looked ragged. Strange. Had there been an accident? Then he heard a small sound from behind the pedestal. A familiar sound. The contented hum a child makes when eating something delicious. He called out, moving around the pedestal. His daughter sat on the floor, cross-legged, holding a piece of golden-brown material in her small hands. Her cheeks were full, and there were crumbs on her dress. She looked up at him with wide eyes and swallowed. "Hi, Daddy," she said in a small voice. "I was hungry." Stared at her, then at the treaty, then back at her. His brain refused to process what he was seeing. It couldn't be, it was impossible, but the evidence was right in front of him. The treaty, the document that represented 3 years of negotiation, 3 centuries of war, the hope of billions of people, had bite marks on it. Small, human, child-sized bite marks. He said slowly, his voice barely working, Did you eat the treaty?" She nodded, looking guilty now. "It smelled like cookies. I was really hungry, Daddy. You forgot to pack snacks." The piece of treaty still in her hands looked like it had been torn off from the main document. Could see her teeth marks in it. Around them, the few delegates in the hall had stopped walking. They were staring. A delegate suddenly shrieked, a sound like shattering glass. "The treaty! The child has destroyed the treaty." Everything happened at once. Alarms began blaring. More delegates rushed into the hall. Within seconds, the room was filled with aliens pushing forward to see the damage. scooped up and held her close, trying to protect her from the surge of bodies. Bo appeared with security forces, creating a barrier around them. Ambassador Wu came running, his face turning gray as he saw what had happened. Pushed through the crowd and stopped dead, her hand covering her mouth. The delegation arrived in force, their crystalline bodies ringing with rage. The followed, their dark forms seeming to expand with fury. For once, both sides were united in their anger at humanity. A scribe approached the remains of the treaty, examining it with shaking limbs. 60%, it clicked mournfully. 60% of the document has been consumed. This is an outrage, a commander declared, its voice resonating through the hall. 3 years of work destroyed by an undisciplined human spawn. A leader stepped forward, its voice like wind through a tomb. Humanity will answer for this insult. The peace is ruined. This was either incompetence or sabotage, and neither is acceptable. Held, she was crying now, sensing the anger around her even if she didn't understand it. "Please," he said to the crowd. "She's just a child. She didn't know." "Ignorance is no excuse," the commander cut him off. "Your species was trusted with the most important diplomatic mission in centuries, and you brought a juvenile to play in the ceremony hall." Ambassador Wu tried to speak, to calm the situation, but his voice was drowned out by 40 species all shouting at once. Some demanded that humans be removed from the galactic community. Others wanted compensation. A few suggested imprisonment for and his family. Through it all, the delegation stood together for the first time in 300 years, united in their fury at humanity. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so horrible. Bo managed to clear a path and carried out of the hall, followed by an Ambassador Wu. Behind them, the arguing continued, growing louder and more heated. "We need to get her to medical," said urgently. "We don't know if that material is toxic to humans." Nodded numbly and started running toward the medical bay, clung to his neck, still crying. "I'm sorry, Daddy, I'm sorry." "It's okay, sweetheart," he whispered, though nothing was okay. Nothing would ever be okay again. In the ceremony hall, the remaining fragment of the Galactic Peace Treaty sat on its pedestal, a monument to humanity's greatest diplomatic failure. The smell of honey still hung in the air, sweet and mocking. Outside, emergency messages were already being sent to Earth, to the Council, to governments across the galaxy. Within hours, everyone would know. The humans had destroyed the peace treaty. A human child had eaten the galaxy's hope for an end to war. History had indeed been made, just not the kind anyone wanted. Dr. Han had been eating lunch when the emergency call came through. Now he stood in his medical bay watching a 5-year-old girl swing her legs from an examination table, while her father paced back and forth like a caged animal. "Deep breath, Captain," Han said calmly. He had been a doctor for 20 years and had learned that panic helped no one. "Let me run the scans first before we worry." Stopped packing but couldn't stand still. His hands kept clenching and unclenching. What if it's poisonous? What if it damages her organs? We don't even know what that material is made of. "Which is why I'm checking," Han said. He ran a medical scanner over small body, watching the readouts carefully. Her vital signs appeared on his display: heart rate, brain activity, blood chemistry, cellular function. Everything was normal, better than normal actually. "Daddy, I don't feel sick," said. She had stopped crying and now seemed more confused than upset. "My tummy feels fine." Han ran the scan again, checking for toxins, foreign materials, anything that might cause problems. Nothing. In fact, his body had already broken down and absorbed most of the treaty material. The process was remarkably efficient, like her digestive system had been designed to handle it. "This is strange," Han muttered, pulling up a detailed neurological scan. "Captain, look at this." Moved to the display, though he had no medical training. The colors and graphs meant nothing to him. "What am I looking at?" Your daughter's brain chemistry. See these elevated levels. These are compounds associated with empathy, emotional regulation, and social bonding. They're naturally occurring in humans, but right now's levels are significantly higher than normal. Is that bad? Asked, his fear spiking again. No, not bad. Just unusual. It's like she's experiencing a heightened state of emotional awareness and connection. Has she been acting differently? Thought about it. In the ceremony hall, even surrounded by angry aliens, had seemed strangely calm once she understood people were upset. She had apologized not just to him, but to several delegates they passed on the way to medical. That was somewhat unusual for a 5-year-old. The door to the medical bay opened and rushed in, followed by a scribe. The being moved with quick, nervous motions, its multiple limbs clicking together. How is she? Asked immediately. Perfectly healthy, Han said. Better than healthy if these readings are correct. The scribe approached the examination table, its large eyes studying with intense curiosity. May I see the medical data? It clicked. Han hesitated, looking at for permission, nodded. At this point, they needed all the help they could get. Han transferred the scans to a display they could access. The scribe went very still, which had learned meant it was thinking hard. Its limbs froze in midair and its eyes stopped moving. For a full minute, nothing happened. Then it began clicking rapidly, too fast for the translator to keep up. Slow down, said gently. What did you find? The scribe turned to face them, its entire body vibrating with what might have been excitement or distress. I must access our historical archives. This is important, very important. May I use your communication systems? Of course, Han said, gesturing to a console. What's going on? The scribe didn't answer. It connected to the console and began pulling up files, thousands of them, ancient documents that scrolled past faster than human eyes could follow. Its limbs danced across the controls, searching for something specific. Sat down next to and took her hand. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Good, she said honestly. The cookie thing tasted really nice, like honey and bread. It wasn't a cookie, said gently. It was a very important document that wasn't meant to be eaten. But it tasted like food, said confused. Why would they make it taste like food if we're not supposed to eat it? The scribe made a sound like breaking glass. Everyone turned to look at it. The creature was shaking, its eyes wide with what looked like shock. What is it? Asked, moving closer. The child is correct, the said slowly. It was meant to be eaten. The room fell silent, was sure he had misheard. What? The scribe gestured to the display, where an ancient text appeared. The writing was in a language didn't recognize, but the translation scrolled alongside it. The biosynthetic material we use for treaties was created billions of years ago by a civilization called the predecessors. They vanished long before any of our species reached the stars. We know this, said. The predecessors left behind many technologies. Yes, but we never understood the true purpose of this one. This voice carried a note of shame. My people inherited the techniques for growing and cultivating the treaty material. We preserved the knowledge for millions of years, but somewhere in that time, we forgot why it was created. Han leaned forward. What was it created for? Peace, the said simply. Real peace, not just written agreements that can be broken. The predecessors designed the material to be consumed by parties in conflict. When eaten, it releases compounds that create neurological changes. Not mind control, nothing so crude, but it creates a biological foundation for cooperation and empathy. Felt his world shifting. You're saying the treaty was supposed to be eaten all along. Yes, the act of consuming it was meant to be the ratification process, a literal embodiment of accepting peace into your being, into your body. Over millions of years, as my people cultivated and modified the material, we lost this knowledge. We thought it was simply a medium for displaying text in universal formats. We built an entire diplomatic tradition on a misunderstanding. Sat down hard on a nearby chair. All those treaties, all those viewing ceremonies, we were supposed to be eating them. According to these records, yes. They brought up more files, showing biological studies from the predecessors. The material contains encoded chemical information. When digested, it doesn't just provide the treaty's terms. It creates a bias toward cooperation with anyone else who consumed the same material. It makes peace not just a choice, but a biological reality. Looked at his daughter, who was watching the adults with wide eyes. So eating the treaty, she actually it. In a manner of speaking, but there's a problem. The turn to face them fully. The treaty was designed to be consumed by both parties to the conflict. The end were supposed to eat it together, creating a shared biological bond. Your daughter consumed it as a third party. This is unprecedented. What does that mean? Asked, feeling hope and fear mixed together. I don't know, they admitted. In all the records I can find, there's no mention of a non-involved party consuming treaty material. The predecessors may have never considered it. Han was studying brain scans again. But the effects are real. Her neurological state has changed. If the N were to consume the remaining fragment or new material synthesized from the same source, they might experience similar changes. We used the last of our cultivated material for this treaty, they said. Creating more would take at least 3 years, and I doubt the N will wait that long. They're calling for sanctions against humanity right now. Stood up, his mind racing. This was insane. The entire galactic community had been doing treaties wrong for countless years, but now that they knew the truth, what could they do with it? We need to present this to the council, he said. They need to know what we've discovered. They'll think we're making excuses, warned. Finding ancient records that conveniently say the treaty was supposed to be eaten after a human child ate it, they'll call it a cover story. The scribe made a thoughtful sound. My people are the recognized authorities on treaty materials. If I present these findings, they will have to listen. Will they believe you? Han asked. Some will, others won't. The truth is often less convenient than what we want to believe. The looked at, its alien eyes unreadable. But we must try. This child has accidentally revealed something important. Perhaps the predecessors would find it amusing that it took a young one, acting on pure instinct, to show us what we had forgotten. Picked up and held her close. She wrapped her arms around his neck, still not fully understanding what was happening, but sensing it was important. What happens now? He asked. Now, said, standing up with determination, we prepare to tell the council something they really don't want to hear. That their ancient traditions are based on a mistake, and that a human child might have accidentally done what they were supposed to do all along. They're going to be so angry, said quietly. Yes, they agreed. But anger can be transformed. That's the whole point of the treaty material. It creates the biological possibility for transformation. Perhaps the council needs to learn that lesson as well. In the hallway outside, could hear raised voices and hurried footsteps. The crisis was spreading. Soon the entire galaxy would be demanding answers. But for the first time since this disaster began, felt a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, his daughter hadn't ruined the peace. Maybe she had accidentally saved it. The emergency council session was the most chaotic event had ever witnessed. Delegates from 40 species filled the chamber, all talking at once. Some shouted. Others made sounds that were physically painful to hear. They rang like alarms, and they seemed to darken the room with their presence. Ambassador Wu stood at the central podium trying to restore order, but no one was listening. They had all heard about the discovery, the ancient records, the claims that treaties were meant to be eaten, and they were not happy. This is convenient timing, a delegate shouted. Humans destroy the treaty, then suddenly find evidence saying it was supposed to be destroyed. Not destroyed, consumed, the scribe corrected, standing beside Ambassador Wu. There is a significant difference. We don't care about your ancient texts, the commander rang out. 3 years of work gone because humans cannot control their young. The war leader stepped forward, its form seeming to pull light into itself. We demand accountability, sanctions at minimum, expulsion from the council if necessary. Sat in the human delegation area, holding on his lap. Sat beside him, her face tight with worry. They had known this would be bad, but the reality was worse than they imagined. Ambassador Wu raised his voice. Please, honored delegates, I ask that you listen to the evidence before making judgments. Evidence? A small bird-like alien chirped angrily. Or excuses. The scribe activated a large display, showing the ancient predecessor documents. Text scrolled past in dozens of languages, all saying the same thing. The treaty material was designed to be consumed. The biological effects were intentional. The entire purpose was to create a physical basis for peace, not just legal agreements. My people have preserved these techniques for millions of years, they said. We take great pride in our work, but we must admit a terrible truth: we forgot the original purpose. We built traditions on incomplete knowledge. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some delegates leaned forward, interested despite their anger. Others remained hostile. Even if we accept this claim, the commander said, it changes nothing. The treaty is destroyed. Creating new material will take years. We will not wait years while our people suffer. Then the war continues, the war leader stated flatly, and humanity bears responsibility for that continuation. Felt shift in his arms. She was watching the aliens with wide eyes, trying to understand why everyone was so upset. He wished he could take her somewhere safe, away from this anger, but there was nowhere to go. This was happening, and they had to face it. Stood up suddenly, looked at her in surprise. She wasn't supposed to speak without Ambassador Wu's permission, but she walked forward anyway, moving to the podium. Honored delegates, she said, her voice clear and strong, I would like to propose something. The chamber quieted slightly. Ambassador Wu looked concerned but didn't stop her. We cannot create new treaty material quickly, continued. That's true, but we know now that the purpose of consuming it was to create biological bonds between parties in conflict, to make peace not just an agreement but a physical reality. Yes, they said, that is correct. Humans have a similar tradition, said. We share meals together. We eat the same food, we sit at the same table, and we use this as a way to build trust and resolve conflicts. We call it breaking bread together. Several aliens made sounds of confusion. The concept of using food for diplomacy was foreign to many species. You want us to eat human food? The commander asked, its tone suggesting this was absurd. I'm suggesting that sharing a meal together creates biological bonds similar to what the treaty material was designed to do. Not identical, but similar. You become vulnerable together. You take unknown substances into your bodies while in each other's presence. It requires trust. A tall, thin alien with too many arms stood up. This is ridiculous. You want to solve a war with dinner. I want to acknowledge that the predecessors understood something important, said. That peace needs more than words. It needs shared experience and biological reality. The human approach may not be as sophisticated as theirs, but it comes from the same understanding. Saw where she was going and felt both admiration and terror. This was insane, but it was also, maybe, brilliant. Ambassador Wu cleared his throat. What exactly are you proposing, Liaison Park? A shared meal, said. Representatives from thee and delegations, along with the human family involved in this incident, sitting together and eating together. We can enhance the food with compounds similar to what the treaty material produces, not to drug anyone, but to create a genuine biological foundation for cooperation. The chamber exploded with noise. Half the delegates were laughing. The other half were outraged. The delegation stood frozen, apparently unable to process what they had just heard. "You want us to share a meal with them," the commander finally said, pointing at our ancient enemies. "Yes," said simply. "That is the most absurd thing I have ever heard," the war leader declared. "We are warriors, not dinner guests." "Warriors who are tired of war," said quietly. "Both of you. Everyone knows it. You've been fighting for 300 years and neither side can win. You came here because you want peace, even if you can't admit it. This is just another path to the same destination." The commander rang with what might have been laughter or rage. "And if we refuse this mad proposal? Then we wait 3 years for new treaty material while your people continue to die," said. "Or you can try something different, something humans have been doing for thousands of years. Share food, share vulnerability, see what happens." Jin, Earths, stood up from the human section. "I can prepare compounds that mimic the treaty material's effects. They won't force anything, but they can lower defensive barriers. Create an environment where cooperation feels natural instead of threatening." "This is manipulation," the war leader said. "So is war," Jin replied. "So is keeping hatred alive because both sides are too proud to stop first. At least this manipulation points toward life instead of death." The chamber fell silent, watched the delegations, saw them communicating with their own people through gestures and signals he couldn't interpret. This was a moment that could go either way. Ambassador Wu spoke carefully. "The Council cannot force either delegation to accept this proposal, but I will say this: humanity has nothing to gain by offering it. We're already facing sanctions and expulsion. We're offering this because we genuinely want to help end a war that has caused too much suffering. And because our daughter ate your treaty," added, standing up within his arms. His voice surprised him with its steadiness. "I'm her father. I brought her to the station. I didn't watch her closely enough, that's on me. But she's 5 years old. She didn't mean harm. She was just hungry and it smelled like food." He looked at the delegations. "If you want someone to blame, blame me. Sanction Earth. Expel us from the Council. But don't let our mistake cost your people more years of war. Try the meal. If it doesn't work, you lose nothing but a few hours. If it does work," he trailed off, letting them imagine the possibilities. The commander turned to its delegation. They conferred in ringing tones that hurt to hear. The war leader did the same with its people, their dark forms merging and separating in patterns that might have been words. Minutes passed, the whole chamber waited. Finally, the commander turned back. "We will attend your meal, but understand this: if it fails, if this is revealed as manipulation or mockery, humanity will face consequences beyond sanctions." The war leader inclined its head. "We also agree, not because we trust humans, but because we are, as you said, tired. If there is even a small chance this could work, we must try it." Felt his legs go weak with relief. Returned to sit beside him, her hands shaking slightly. Ambassador Wu looked like he wanted to collapse. "The meal will be held in 2 days," Ambassador Wu announced. "At the Seoul Diplomatic Complex on Earth. Details will be arranged with both delegations to ensure the food is safe for all participants." As the session broke up and delegates filed out, heard the whispers. Some thought humans were crazy. Others thought they were clever. Most thought this would fail spectacularly. Leaned close to him. "I just committed us to hosting the most important dinner in galactic history." "I noticed," said. "Now we just need to figure out how to do it." "And we need Sora," added. "If anyone can turn food into diplomacy, it's a who understands how different species process nutrients." Was already sending a message to his wife, wherever she was in the galaxy. They needed her home, fast. Tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, are we having a dinner party?" "Yes, sweetheart, the biggest dinner party ever." "Can I help?" Looked at his daughter, the child who had accidentally revealed ancient truths, and forced the galaxy to rethink its entire approach to peace. I think you've helped enough already. But he smiled when he said it, and for the first time since this whole disaster began, he thought they might actually survive this. Sara arrived at the Seoul diplomatic complex exactly 48 hours before the meal, carrying 3 cases of research equipment and looking like she hadn't slept in days. Met her at the landing platform and pulled her into a hug. "I got your messages," she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "All of them. I can't believe a peace treaty." "Neither can anyone else," said, "but here we are." Sara pulled back and looked at the building behind them. The Seoul diplomatic complex had been built to host exactly this kind of event, but no one had expected it to happen so soon or under such strange circumstances. Where's inside with helping set up? She thinks this is all very exciting. Of course she does, she's 5. Sara picked up her cases. "All right, show me the kitchen. I have 2 days to prepare a meal that will either save the peace or start an interstellar incident." The kitchen was actually a full laboratory, equipped to handle food preparation for dozens of species with different biology. Sara moved through it like she was born there, setting up her equipment and pulling up files on physiology. Jin was already there, working on compound synthesis. He looked up when Sara entered and gave her a tired smile. "Doctor, thank you for coming so quickly." "Wouldn't miss it," Sara said. "My daughter accidentally made history. Least I can do is try to keep it from being a complete disaster." Together, they worked through the night and into the next day. Sara studied what they could safely absorb, certain mineral compounds, crystalline structures dissolved in liquid. They could process organic matter if it was treated properly, stripped of light and prepared in ways that wouldn't burn their void-adapted biology. "We need to make this feel like a real meal," Sara said, staring at her notes. "Not just nutritional delivery. There has to be ceremony to it, meaning." Joined them in the kitchen, bringing traditional Korean dishes to consider. In Korean culture, sharing food is about more than eating. It's about showing care. When you feed someone, you're taking responsibility for their. "Perfect," Sara said. "That's exactly the message we need." She began designing dishes that would work for all 3 species. For a clear broth rich in minerals, served in bowls that resonated with their natural frequencies. For the fermented foods processed in darkness, complex and subtle. For the humans, traditional Korean dishes modified to complement the other foods. Jin added his synthesized compounds carefully. Not enough to alter anyone's judgment, just enough to lower defensive barriers, to make empathy feel natural instead of threatening. The day of the meal arrived too quickly. The ceremony hall had been transformed. Instead of the stark diplomatic setup, it now held a single large table. The lighting could shift to accommodate everyone's needs. Translators were positioned carefully so conversation could flow naturally. Stood in the entrance hall, wearing formal attire and feeling more nervous than he had at any point in his diplomatic career. Beside him, Sara held's hand. The girl was wearing a traditional Korean dress and looked both excited and confused about why everyone was so serious. Ambassador Wu appeared looking grave. "They're here. Both delegations arrived separately. They're waiting in different rooms." "And the council observers?" asked. She was coordinating the entire event, somehow keeping track of 1,000 details at once. "Watching remotely. If this goes wrong, they want distance. If it goes right," Wu trailed off. No one wanted to think too hard about success yet. The delegation entered first. 5 crystalline beings moved with careful dignity, their bodies catching the light and throwing rainbows across the walls. The commander led them, its form larger and more complex than the others. They stopped when they saw the humans. "We have come as promised," the commander said, its voice like bells, "though we still believe this is madness." "Thank you for trying anyway," said. They arrived moments later. Four dark shapes that seemed to absorb light, led by the war leader. They stopped when they saw and for a moment tension filled the room. 300 years of war stood between these two groups. "The table is round," said quickly. "No one sits at the head, everyone is equal here." They moved into the ceremony hall slowly, like animals circling each other. They took positions on one side of the table. They took the opposite side. The humans sat between them, with position between her parents. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was heavy with history and suspicion. Then spoke up, her child's voice clear in the quiet. "Are you going to be friends now?" The commander made a sound like breaking glass. The war leader's form rippled, started to shush his daughter, but Sora squeezed his hand. "Let her be herself," the gesture said. "We are trying to end a war," the war leader said, its voice surprisingly gentle. "That is not quite the same as friendship." "But you could be friends," insisted. "Friends share food, my teacher says so." "Your teacher is wise," the commander said, though perhaps optimistic. Sora stood and moved to the kitchen entrance. "The meal will be served in courses. Each one is designed to be safe and nutritious for your biology. But more than that, each dish represents something important in human culture." The first course arrived. For the bowls of clear mineral broth that resonated with musical tones. For the small portions of fermented vegetables prepared in complete darkness. For the humans, a simple soup. "In Korea, we say that soup is comfort," Sora explained. "It's what you give someone when they're tired or hurt or need to feel cared for. This first course is about acknowledging that everyone here has been hurt by war." The commander carefully submerged part of its crystalline form in the broth. The war leader sampled its portion. Slowly, carefully, they ate. "It's good," the war leader said, sounding surprised. "Of course it is," Sora said. "I made it." A sound came from the commander that might have been laughter. "You have confidence." "I have skill," Sora corrected, "and I care what happens here." The next course came, then another. With each dish, Sora explained its significance. Shared plates that required cooperation. Dishes that had to be assembled at the table, forcing communication. Foods that were better when mixed together than eaten separately. And slowly, impossibly, conversation began. The war leader mentioned that their people were tired of living in cold void stations. The commander admitted their crystals were growing brittle from constant stress. Both sides had lost so much to this war, not just lives, but art, joy, the simple pleasure of existing without fear. Jin's compounds were working, but so was something simpler. The shared vulnerability of eating together. The universal need for sustenance. The breaking down of barriers that happened when you sat across from someone and saw them as a living being with needs and fears instead of an abstract enemy. Asked questions throughout the meal, innocent and curious. What did the sound like when they sang? Could they see colors? Did they have children? The adults answered her, and in answering her, they talked to each other. By the time the final course arrived, the atmosphere had changed. Not to friendship, that would take time, but to something like cautious respect. The weren't enemies sharing a table. They were people, tired of fighting, willing to consider alternatives. "This war started over mining rights," the commander said. "Such a small thing in the beginning." "All wars start small," the war leader agreed. "It's pride that makes them grow." "So put pride aside," Sora said, setting down the last dish. "This is rice cake. In Korean tradition, it symbolizes good fortune and unity. You don't have to sign anything tonight. You don't have to make promises, just agree to talk again, to have another meal, to keep trying." The commander looked at the war leader. Something passed between them, some communication humans couldn't perceive. "We will talk again," the commander said. "We will," the war leader agreed. It wasn't a peace treaty. It wasn't even a formal agreement, but it was something, a beginning. As the delegations left, both thanked the family. The commander paused by. "Young one, you caused great trouble by eating our treaty." "I know," said, "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Sometimes trouble is necessary. Sometimes old ways need to be broken so new ways can grow." 3 months later, the new treaty was synthesized. But this time, everyone understood what it was for. In a ceremony that was broadcast across the galaxy, representatives from the N species consumed pieces of the treaty. The war was officially ended. But the real peace had started earlier, over a meal in Seoul. The Seoul Protocols became standard practice for galactic diplomacy. Major negotiations now included shared meals as part of the process. Dozens of other conflicts began moving toward resolution, inspired by humanity's absurd solution. Became the youngest being in galactic history to influence interstellar peace. When journalists asked her about it years later, she would shrug and say, "I was just hungry." A statue was erected at the Seoul Diplomatic Complex showing a small human child reaching upward, with the inscription, "Sometimes peace requires innocence, creativity, and a complete disregard for tradition." Kept his position in the diplomatic corps and became a specialist in cross-cultural understanding. Sora turned her research toward food-based diplomacy, was promoted to senior liaison. Ambassador Wu retired, finally able to rest after the most stressful 2 weeks of his life. And the galaxy learned something important. Humans might be young and inexperienced, but they brought fresh perspectives to ancient problems. They weren't afraid to try ridiculous solutions. They understood that peace wasn't just about agreements and laws. It was about connection, vulnerability, and the simple act of sharing a meal. The Ents still had disagreements, but now they resolved them over dinner instead of with weapons. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. And it all started because a 5-year-old girl thought a peace treaty smelled like cookies. The galaxy would never be quite the same.